March 1873. United States Congress, a single vote. So one decision about silver coinage. It would be called the crime of 1873, and it would dominate American politics for the next 25 years. Before 1873, the U.S. used bimetallism. Both gold and silver were legal money. You could mint coins from either metal, but silver was becoming more abundant. New mines in Nevada were producing massive quantities. Silver prices were falling. Congress, quietly, passed the Coinage Act of 1873. It removed the silver dollar from circulation. The U.S. was now on the gold standard. Most people didn't notice. But Western miners, farmers, and debtors would soon call it the greatest crime in American history. Here's why it mattered. When you're on a gold standard, money is scarce. There's only so much gold. This keeps prices stable but makes borrowing expensive. Farmers were drowning in debt. They'd borrowed money to buy land and equipment. Now they had to repay in expensive gold-backed dollars. If silver had remained legal currency, the money supply would have expanded. Inflation would have risen. Debts would have become easier to pay. The crime of 1873 locked farmers into crushing debt with no escape. The populist movement was born from this rage. Free silver became their rallying cry. They demanded the unlimited coinage of silver at a 16-to-1 ratio with gold. This would expand the money supply, cause inflation, and help debtors. Bankers and industrialists in the East opposed it. They benefited from tight money and stable prices. The battle lines were drawn: debtors versus creditors, West versus East, silver versus gold. In 1896, it all came to a head. William Jennings Bryan, a 36-year-old congressman, gave the most famous speech in American political history at the Democratic National Convention. "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." The crowd went wild. Bryan won the Democratic nomination. He ran against William McKinley in the most consequential election of the 19th century. Bryan represented the farmers, the workers, the debtors, everyone crushed by deflation. McKinley represented the banks, the railroads, the Eastern establishment, everyone who benefited from gold. McKinley won. The gold standard stayed. Bryan lost again in 1900 and 1908. The silver movement collapsed. But the question didn't go away. Who does money serve? The debate over silver was really a debate about who controls the economy. Should money be scarce and stable, benefiting creditors, or abundant and inflationary, benefiting debtors? This same debate continues today. Inflation versus deflation. Tight money versus loose money. Federal Reserve policy debates are just modern versions of the silver question. The crime of 1873 wasn't really a crime. It was a policy choice. But for millions of Americans crushed by debt, it felt like theft. Because when you change the rules of money, you change who wins and who loses. And the losers never forget. I am Name, and this is the History Creator. Money isn't neutral, it's a weapon, and whoever controls it controls everything. 16th century Spain, the most powerful empire on earth. Silver flowed from the Americas in quantities never seen before. The mines of Potosi and Bolivia produced more wealth than anywhere in human history. Spain controlled the world's silver. They should have ruled forever. Instead, they went bankrupt 5 times. How do you own the world's money and still go broke? Welcome to the greatest economic disaster of the Renaissance. When Spanish conquistadors discovered the mountain of silver at Potosi in 1545, they thought they'd found infinite wealth. Indigenous slaves died by the thousands mining it. Ships carried it across the Atlantic in convoys. The Spanish crown took a fifth of everything. By 1600, 85% of the world's silver came from Spanish America. But here's the problem. Silver isn't wealth. It's just metal. Spain didn't build industries. They didn't develop manufacturing. They imported everything: cloth from England, weapons from Germany, food from France. The silver flowed in, then immediately flowed back out to pay for imports. Worse, the massive influx of silver caused catastrophic inflation. Prices in Spain increased 400% in a century. A loaf of bread that cost 1 coin in 1500 cost 4 coins by 1600. The Spanish crown borrowed against future silver shipments. When those shipments were delayed or captured by pirates, they couldn't pay debts. In 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy for the first time. They would do it again in 1560, 1575, 1596, and 1607. Each bankruptcy destroyed credibility. Interest rates soared. No one wanted to lend to Spain. Meanwhile, the silver flooded into other economies. England used it to build industries. The Netherlands built a merchant fleet. France developed manufacturing. Spain's silver financed the rise of its competitors. But the real story is even darker. The Potosi mines consumed human lives at an industrial scale. Indigenous people were forced into the mita system, mandatory labor in deadly conditions. Miners descended into shafts so deep they never saw sunlight. Mercury poisoning from the refining process killed thousands more. The altitude alone was lethal. An estimated 8 million people died in the Potosi mines over 3 centuries. That silver came at the cost of genocide, and Spain squandered it. By 1700, Spain was a second-rate power. The silver was gone. The empire was collapsing. The lesson? Wealth without production is worthless. Resources without industry mean nothing. Spain discovered the world's greatest treasure and died rich but weak. Because silver can't buy competence, it can't create industry, it can't substitute for actual economic development. All it can do is delay the inevitable. I'm name, and this is the history creator. Spain's Silver Age is a warning. Having resources isn't the same as having power, and sometimes unlimited money is the worst thing that can happen to you. January 1980. The Hunt brothers, Nelson Bunker and William Herbert, own nearly half the world's silver. The price has skyrocketed from $6 per ounce to $50 in just months. They're hours away from controlling the entire global silver market. And then it collapses. This is the story of the greatest market manipulation in modern history. The Hunts were Texas oil billionaires. In the 1970s, they became convinced the dollar would collapse. Inflation was raging, trust in government was low. They decided to buy silver as a hedge. But they didn't just buy silver, they tried to own all of it. Starting in 1973, they bought millions of ounces. Then they took physical delivery, actually storing the silver instead of just holding contracts. This was critical. By removing silver from circulation, they created artificial scarcity. As prices rose, more people wanted in. The Hunts borrowed money to buy more silver. A feedback loop formed. Higher prices justified more buying, which pushed prices even higher. By January 1980, silver hit $50 per ounce, a 10x increase in a year. The Hunts controlled an estimated 100 million ounces. At peak prices, their silver holdings were worth $5 billion. They were on the verge of cornering the market entirely. If they succeeded, they could set any price they wanted. Every industry that used silver, photography, electronics, jewelry, would have to pay whatever they demanded. But authorities saw the danger. The COMEX exchange changed the rules. They implemented Silver Rule 7, limiting speculative positions and requiring higher margins. Suddenly, the Hunts couldn't borrow as much. They couldn't buy as much. The price stalled. Then it started falling. March 27th, 1980. Silver Thursday. Silver crashed from $50 to $10 in a single day. The Hunts had borrowed billions against their silver holdings. When prices fell, they faced massive margin calls. They couldn't pay. Their empire collapsed overnight. Banks panicked. The Hunts owed over $1 billion. If they defaulted, it could trigger a financial crisis. The Federal Reserve intervened, arranging a bailout to prevent systemic collapse. The Hunts lost everything. They filed for bankruptcy in 1988, but the story didn't end there. In 1988, they were convicted of manipulating the silver market. They were fined and banned from trading commodities. The Hunt silver panic revealed the fragility of commodity markets. Two men with enough money almost controlled the global supply of an essential industrial metal. If they'd succeeded, the economic consequences would have been catastrophic. The lesson? Markets can be manipulated. Regulations exist for a reason, and even billionaires can't beat the market forever. Eventually, reality catches up. The Hunts thought they were smarter than everyone else. They thought they could control silver. Instead, silver destroyed them. I'm name, and this is the history creator. Markets are powerful forces. Try to control them, and they'll crush you. Even if you're a billionaire. Especially if you're a billionaire. September 1622. The Spanish treasure fleet departs Havana. 28 ships loaded with silver, gold, and precious cargo. Destination? Spain. They never arrived. A hurricane struck. 8 ships sank. Hundreds died. Spain lost a year's worth of colonial wealth in a single day. This wasn't just a shipwreck. It was an economic catastrophe. The Spanish Empire ran on American silver. Every year, the treasure fleet, the Flota de Indias, carried millions of pesos across the Atlantic. The crown depended on it. Debts were scheduled around fleet arrivals. Wars were financed by anticipated silver shipments. When a fleet sank, the entire imperial economy seized up. The 1622 disaster was particularly devastating. Spain was fighting the 30 Years' War. They desperately needed money. The lost fleet contained 2 million pesos in registered cargo, and likely much more unregistered. Smuggling was rampant. The true value was probably double. Spain couldn't pay its armies. Credit dried up. The empire, already in decline, accelerated its fall. But the story gets stranger. For centuries, the wrecks lay undiscovered. Then, in 1985, treasure hunter Mel Fisher found the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, the fleet's flagship. The wreck contained 40 tons of silver, 125 gold bars, and emeralds worth millions. It was the greatest treasure discovery in history, but who owned it? Spain claimed it was their sovereign property. Florida said it belonged to the state. Fisher said finders keepers. The legal battle lasted 8 years. Eventually, courts ruled in Fisher's favor. The treasure was his. Spain's loss in 1622 became Fisher's fortune in 1985. But here's the deeper story. The treasure fleet system was inherently fragile. Spanish wealth depended on ships crossing a hurricane-prone ocean for 3 months. Pirates hunted them. Storms sank them. Corruption riddled them. It was a terrible system. But Spain had no alternative. They couldn't develop domestic industries. They couldn't create sustainable economic growth. They needed American silver, so they risked everything on annual gambles against the Atlantic. Eventually they lost. The 1622 fleet disaster is a metaphor for the entire Spanish Empire. Fragile supply chains, dependence on external resources, no backup plan. When something went wrong, a hurricane, a war, a bankruptcy, the whole system collapsed. And here's the haunting part. There are still treasure fleets on the ocean floor, dozens of ships laden with silver never recovered. Somewhere in the Caribbean, hundreds of millions of dollars in colonial wealth sits in the dark, guarded by fish and coral. Spain's glory, Spain's failure, all just waiting. I'm Name, and this is the history creator. Empires don't fall suddenly. They fall because they build themselves on foundations that can't hold. Spain's foundation was silver ships, and the ocean took them one by one until nothing was left. 1890. British merchants are smuggling opium into China. China tries to stop them. Britain goes to war. But this isn't about opium. It's about silver. Welcome to the Opium Wars and the economic disaster that destroyed the Qing dynasty. For centuries, China was the richest economy on earth. They produced silk, porcelain, and tea, luxury goods Europe desperately wanted. But China didn't want anything Europe made. British merchants had a problem. How do you trade with a country that does not need your products? The solution was silver. Britain paid for Chinese goods with Spanish silver dollars. Millions of them flowed into China every year. This worked until it didn't. British merchants started smuggling opium from India into China. Opium addiction exploded. Millions of Chinese became addicts. But the economic effect was worse. Suddenly, silver was flowing out of China to pay for opium. The trade balance reversed. China's silver-based economy collapsed. Silver became scarce. Prices deflated. Farmers couldn't pay taxes. The government couldn't fund itself. The Qing emperor tried to stop the opium trade. In 1839, he sent Commissioner Lin Zexu to Canton. Lin confiscated 20,000 chests of British opium and destroyed them. Britain's response? War. The First Opium War, 1839-1842, was a mismatch. British steamships and modern weapons devastated Chinese forces. China lost. The Treaty of Nanking forced them to pay massive reparations in silver. Open 5 ports to British trade, cede Hong Kong to Britain legalize opium. It was humiliation at gunpoint. But the silver crisis continued. The Second Opium War, 1856-1860, was even worse. More defeats, more unequal treaties, more silver flowing out. The Qing dynasty never recovered. The silver drain destabilized the economy. Rebellions erupted. The Taiping Rebellion alone killed 20 to 30 million people. By 1912, the dynasty collapsed entirely. Why did silver matter so much? China used silver as money. When it became scarce, the entire economy broke. Taxes were assessed in silver, but farmers earned income in copper or goods. As silver became expensive, taxes became impossible to pay. Deflation crushed the rural economy. Starvation followed. Rebellions ignited. The Opium Wars weren't just about drugs. They were about silver, trade balances, and economic control. Britain used opium as a weapon to reverse silver flows. It worked. China paid for it with millions of lives and a century of humiliation. The lesson? Control the money supply, control the nation. Britain understood this. China learned it too late. I'm Name, and this is the history creator. The Opium Wars are often taught as stories about drugs and imperialism, but the real story is silver, because when you drain a country's money, you destroy more than its economy, you destroy its future.